My creepy neighbor photographed birds daily, but somehow his camera would always point at the kids. So, I hid in the bushes and caught him doing something that would throw him behind bars for life. Glenn lived 2 houses down my whole life, and the whole block treated him like a grandfather. He watered his lawn every morning, waving at every car. He kept popsicles for kids on hot days and a bowl of candy by his door for any kid who walked past after school. Every parent on our street thought Glenn was the safest man alive. My mom called him a godsend because he watched our house when we traveled. My dad played cards with him on Fridays, but something about Glenn made my skin crawl since I was little. The way he'd squat down to talk to my 9-year-old sister Lily and rest his hand on her shoulder for way too long. The way he'd show up at the bus stop every afternoon like he had nowhere else to be. He always had his phone out. He told everyone he was an amateur photographer who liked taking pictures of birds in the trees near the corner. Some moms thought it was sweet and asked him to send the candid shots if he caught any. Glenn always smiled and said of course. Then Lily started avoiding the front yard. She used to ride her scooter up and down the sidewalk for hours, and suddenly she only wanted to ride out back. When I asked her why, she said she didn't like how Glenn looked at her. I told my mom. She said I was being protective, which was sweet, but Glenn was harmless. He'd watched all of us grow up. That Saturday I was helping Mr. Holloway from across the street load boxes into his pickup. He was moving to Florida to be near his daughter. While we were carrying out a bookshelf, I noticed his side window faced Glenn's backyard. Mr. Holloway saw me looking and told me Glenn had asked him 3 different times over the past year if he wanted to sell that exact section of his fence. Just the strip that gave a view into Glenn's yard. Glenn had offered him cash. Mr. Holloway told him no every time and didn't think much of it until he said it out loud to me. He looked at me and said, "Why would a man pay cash to a neighbor for a slice of fence?" I didn't have an answer. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Glenn had cash for fence strips. Glenn was always at the bus stop. Glenn took pictures of birds, but I had never once seen him point his phone up at a tree. Lily had a half day on Wednesday. I told my parents I'd pick her up since I was off from my warehouse shift. What I didn't tell them was that I drove the long way and parked 1 street over at 2:15. I walked back through the cut between the houses behind ours. Glenn's backyard had a tall wood fence on 3 sides, but his back gate was chain link with vines grown through it. I crouched behind a bush at the tree line and waited. At 2:42, Glenn came out his back door with his phone and a folding chair. He set the chair down in a spot where, through a gap in his hedge, you could see straight to the bus stop. The bus pulled up at 2:45. I watched him hold his phone up the entire time the kids were getting off. He wasn't pointing it at any tree. He wasn't pointing it at any bird. He was holding it level, tracking the kids walking past, swiping his thumb on the screen like he was scrolling through what he had already taken. When Lily walked by, he leaned forward in his chair. His thumb stopped moving on the screen. He stayed forward like that until she was past his hedge, and then he leaned back and resumed scrolling. I sat in that bush with my legs going numb until I was sure he'd gone back inside. Then I walked back to my truck on shaking legs and sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before I could turn the key. I called my cousin Travis. Travis works dispatch for the county sheriff. I told him everything. Travis told me not to do a single thing and let him make some calls. 2 days later, a man in plain clothes knocked on our door. He was a detective. Travis had passed the report up, and the detective said they had already gotten 2 complaints about Glenn from parents in the next neighborhood over. Neither one had been enough to act on alone. With what I had seen, plus what Mr. Holloway said about the fence offers, I thought Glenn would be behind bars within the day. I was dead wrong. 3 days after the detective came to talk to me, I got home from my shift and heard laughing from the kitchen. Not just my parents. A third voice. Glenn was sitting at our kitchen table with a mug of coffee in his hands like he belonged there. Marley was across from him smiling so wide it made my chest hurt. Alden was leaning back chuckling at something Glenn just said. There was a homemade pie on the counter and a gift bag with pink tissue paper on the floor by Marley's chair. A gift for Lily. Glenn looked right at me and his whole face lit up like I was the person he'd been waiting for. "There he is. I was just telling your folks how much I appreciate this family." The warmth wasn't real. It was aimed at me like a dart. He knew exactly what he was doing in my parents' kitchen 3 days after I reported him. Marley followed me into the hallway and asked me, low so the others wouldn't hear, if I was the one who reported Glenn to the sheriff. Glenn had told her someone called him in, and it really hurt him. I waited half a second too long. She read it off my face. Alden came around the corner already mad. "Glenn has been part of this street for 20 years. Calling the sheriff was out of line." I tried to tell them what I saw. The phone at the bus stop, the kids, Lily. Alden cut me off. "You were spying on him?" I brought up Mr. Holloway and the fence offers. Marley said Mr. Holloway was old and confused and Glenn probably just wanted privacy. "Glenn almost cried at our table. He's a lonely old man and you treated him like a criminal." I tried one more time. I said Lily stopped riding her scooter out front. Didn't that mean something? Marley said, "Kids get bored of things." I went down the hall to Lily's room. She was on her bed with a coloring book, holding the crayon without coloring, staring at the page. I asked her to tell me again how she felt about Glenn. She didn't look up. She said, "He always watches me. Not like other grown-ups. He watches me like he's counting." That sentence went through me like ice water. Like he's counting. I don't even know what she meant exactly, but I knew it was real. A 9-year-old doesn't make that up. She doesn't come up with a phrase like that because someone scared her into it or coached her. She said it because that's what she felt. That's what Glenn's eyes did to her. For a second, I felt something like relief. At least Lily could see it. At least one person in this house could feel what I was feeling. I heard the floor creak. Marley was in the doorway. "Stop scaring your sister with this. I mean it. Drop it or you and I are going to have a real problem." I sat there after she walked away. My own mom heard her daughter say a man watched her like he was counting and she told me to stop. She didn't ask Lily what counting meant. She didn't hold Lily's hand. She told me. I called Travis from my truck. He went quiet on the other end and then told me the detective's hands were tied. The 2 complaints from the next street had both been filed and dropped. One family moved away. The other stopped returning calls. Without those complaints, without physical evidence of illegal material on his devices, no judge would sign off on a search. "A pattern is not probable cause," Travis said. The next week I kept watching, but Glenn had changed. The folding chair never came out again. Around 2:40 every afternoon, a faint glow appeared behind the blinds of Glenn's back bedroom window. The kind of glow you get from a screen, shifting as someone scrolled. He had moved his whole setup indoors, and the timing still lined up with the school bus. I called the detective. He thanked me. He said it wasn't wasn't enough. Creepy is not criminal. That weekend, Glenn threw a barbecue for the whole block. Alden came to my room and told me I was coming, and I was going to apologize to that man. I sat up and said I wasn't apologizing. Not now. Not ever. Alden's face went hard. Then maybe you should find somewhere else to stay until you figure out how to act like a grown man. I went to the barbecue. Glenn was flipping burgers and telling a story that had 3 different moms laughing. Marley walked right up and hugged him. Lily sat down on the back steps near the door and didn't move. Even while Glenn was grilling, his eyes kept tracking. He wasn't looking at the adults. Every time a kid ran past or grabbed a plate, his eyes followed them for just a second before going back to whoever he was talking to. So smooth, so practiced. Nobody else saw it. After 20 minutes, I told Glenn I needed the bathroom. He smiled big. Straight through the kitchen, down the hall. The bathroom was first door on the left, but past the bathroom there was another door, and on the outside of that door, at eye level, was a deadbolt. Exterior grade. On the outside of an interior door. Not the inside. The outside. I tried the handle. Locked. Then a voice behind me. Bathroom's back that way, buddy. Glenn was at the end of the hallway holding a spatula. He was smiling, but his eyes weren't. They were flat and watching me like I was something he needed to decide what to do with. I said I got turned around. Glenn walked me back toward the kitchen, and when we passed through the doorway, he put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't just touch me. He squeezed. His fingers dug into the muscle near my neck, and he leaned in close enough that I could smell the charcoal smoke on his shirt. Your dad told me about the misunderstanding with the sheriff. No hard feelings, but I'd hate for your family to have problems because of a mix-up. Then he let go and walked back outside like nothing happened. It was a threat wrapped in a smile, delivered in a voice that made it sound like he was being nice. I found Lily still on the back steps, pulling grass out of the ground with her fingers. She didn't look at me. After a few seconds, she whispered, "Can we go home?" I called Travis the second I got Lily inside. The deadbolt, the shoulder squeeze, the words about my family having problems. Travis went quiet for a long time. Then he said the detective had been working a separate angle this whole time. The next day, the detective called. His voice was different, not as careful. One of the 2 families from the next street had refiled their complaint. The mother had found something. Her husband had borrowed some kind of device from Glenn months ago for a fishing trip, and when she was going through the cloud account linked to it, she found a shared album Glenn had accidentally synced. The album had photos of her daughter, taken from a distance at the bus stop, and her daughter was clearly the subject of every single one. Not a bird in the background, not a tree, just her kid, walking, standing, waiting, over and over from different days. I asked the detective if it was enough. He said the photos alone weren't illegal. Public space. No law against photographing a kid at a bus stop, no matter how wrong it felt. He said, creepy is not criminal. I need what is behind that locked door. A locked interior door inside a man's own home wasn't probable cause. He needed a witness, a victim statement, or some kind of digital evidence showing illegal material existed on those devices. Without that, no judge would sign off on a search. 2 days later, Alden found me in the kitchen and told me Glenn had offered to teach Lily how to use a real camera. A mentor thing. Take her to the park, show her how to photograph birds. He said it like it was good news. Isn't that nice? I put the knife down and said no, absolutely not, not a chance. Alden's smile disappeared. He tilted his head and looked at me the way people look at someone they think is broken. You need to stop this. You're embarrassing this family, I said, and you're handing your daughter to a man who photographs other people's kids from his backyard. The kitchen went dead quiet. Alden stared at me. For 1 second, maybe 2, I thought I saw something shift in his eyes, something that looked like doubt. Then his face closed back up like a door slamming shut. Get out of my house. Come back when you're ready to act right. I packed a bag and drove to Travis's apartment. He buzzed me in without asking why. I dropped my duffel and stared at the ceiling. Travis sat across from me and said, "We're running out of time. If Glenn gets spooked enough, he's going to clean that room out and we'll have nothing." Then he said there might be one more play, but I wasn't going to like it. He told me to go back and apologize. Play nice. Act like I was backing off. Bring someone Glenn had never seen. A second witness with no connection to the original report. And get inside the house one more time. Document the door properly. The detective had said off the record that a credible second witness describing a fortified interior door, combined with the refiled complaint, the cloud album photos, and my eyewitness account, might be enough for a welfare check. Lower bar than a search warrant. It wasn't perfect, but it was a door. Maybe the only door we had left. Travis didn't sugarcoat the rest. If Glenn caught the witness, he'd clean the room out the same night. If Glenn wanted to, he could call the sheriff himself and claim I'd brought someone into his house to spy. I'd take the hit. Not him, not the detective. Me. I went through every person I knew. Pia. She worked my shift at the warehouse. Had for 2 years. She didn't scare easy, and she didn't run her mouth. Glenn had never seen her. I called her and told her everything. The bus stop, the phone, Lily's words, the detective, the deadbolt, the shoulder squeeze. Pia was quiet the whole time I talked. When I finished, she just said, "When are we going?" Tuesday afternoon. Glenn was always home on Tuesdays. Travis walked me through it. 90 seconds max. Flush, run the water, step past the bathroom, photograph the deadbolt and frame on her phone, listen for sound through the door, get back. Anything longer, and Glenn would notice. Tuesday, I picked Pia up. She was wearing jeans and a plain shirt, and her phone was in her back pocket. On the drive over, she asked what Glenn looked like when the mask came off. I told her it was like watching a light switch flip. 1 second, the warmest person in the room. The next, his eyes went empty, and his voice dropped to something quiet and careful, like every word was a tool he was placing exactly where he wanted it. Pia nodded, and didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. We parked on our street around 2 and walked up Glenn's front path. I knocked. Glenn opened the door, and the smile that spread across his face looked warm and genuine, like he had been hoping I would come by. He looked at Pia, then at me, then back. Well, this is a nice surprise. I told him this was Pia, my girlfriend, and I wanted to clear the air. Glenn's eyes stayed on Pia a beat longer than felt natural, like he was deciding something. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. He led us into the living room. I sat on the couch with Pia next to me. Glenn took the recliner across from us, hands folded in his lap. That patient grandfather expression he'd been practicing for 20 years. I made myself look at him and said, "My dad told me I owe you an apology." He's right. I was out of line. Glenn studied my face for a long moment, longer than felt comfortable, like he was checking the words for cracks. Then the smile came back, slow and wide. "I always knew you were a good kid." Pia made small talk. Glenn asked her about work, about how long we'd been together. When she mentioned she'd been drinking a lot of water on the drive over and asked if she could use the bathroom, Glenn's eyes moved, not to her, to the hallway. Just a flicker, like his brain was doing math before his mouth caught up. Then he smiled and pointed her down the hall. He watched her go until she turned the corner. I needed to keep him in that chair. I asked him about the camera hobby. I said I'd been thinking about picking up photography and wanted to know what kind of setup he used. It was like flipping a switch. Glenn lit up. He talked about lenses and focal lengths and bird migration along the coast and how early morning was the best time to catch a bird in flight because the angle of the sun hit the wings just right. He sounded like a man who loved birds. He sounded like a man with nothing to hide. 30 seconds, 45, 60. Glenn was mid-sentence when he stopped. His head tilted slightly to the right, like a dog that just heard a sound it didn't recognize. Your girlfriend's been in there a while. I shrugged and said she probably just needed a minute. Glenn was already standing. He walked toward the hallway and I followed. When we turned the corner, I saw Pia 2 feet past the bathroom door, 2 feet from the locked room, her phone held up near the doorframe, angled at the deadbolt. She turned. Glenn stopped walking. The change in his face was instant. The warmth and the smile and the kind old man on the recliner, all of it drained out like water down a sink. His face went flat. His eyes went empty. He looked at Pia and said very quietly, almost a whisper, "What are you doing in my hallway?" Pia said she was looking for a towel. Glenn didn't blink. He didn't look at the bathroom. He didn't offer a towel. He turned his head slowly to me. "You brought her here to snoop." The mask was gone. His voice dropped to something low and controlled, full of a quiet rage that made the hallway feel smaller. "You have no idea what you're doing, boy. I've been here for 20 years. 20 years. Your parents trust me. This whole street trusts me. You think anyone is going to believe you over me?" I looked at him with that dead-bolted door right behind Pia and said, "Maybe not, but they'll believe what's behind that door." A twitch moved across his face, right below his left eye, fast and small, like a muscle that fired on its own. He took another step closer, close enough that I could see the veins in his neck, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "There is nothing behind that door." I held his stare. "Then open it." His jaw locked, his hands balled at his sides. For a second I thought he was going to swing. The hallway was dead silent. Nobody moved. Then he straightened and stepped back. "Get out of my house, both of you, now." We walked past him through the kitchen and out the front door. The second my feet hit the sidewalk, I called Travis. He patched in the detective. Pia took the phone. She described the door like she'd been studying it her whole life. The deadbolt was exterior grade, the kind you would put on a front door, not an interior closet. There was weather stripping around the entire frame, the rubber kind that seals out light and sound. When she stood close to the door and held still, she could hear a faint hum coming from the other side, low and constant, like electronics running. The detective was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said that combined with the refiled complaint, the cloud album photos, my eyewitness account, and now a second witness with no prior connection to the case describing a fortified interior room with active electronics, he had enough to take to a judge. He said he was going tonight. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. Travis. 4 words. The warrant is signed. At 5:30 the next morning, I drove to the next street over and parked in the cut between the houses where I'd watched Glenn from before. At 6 a.m., 3 unmarked cars turned onto the block. They moved slow and quiet, no sirens, no lights. They parked in front of Glenn's house and officers got out. They walked up the steps where Glenn kept his bowl of candy, the same porch where he sat every evening waving at the block. They knocked. Glenn opened the door in his bathrobe, smiling, looking at them like guests he was happy to see. They went inside. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Then the front door opened and officers started coming out carrying things. 2 desktop towers, a laptop, a cardboard box packed tight with external hard drives, a small metal filing cabinet with a lock on the front. All of it came from behind that dead-bolted door. Glenn came out last, still in his bathrobe, but his hands were behind his back now. Handcuffs. He stood on his porch, the same porch where he handed out popsicles and told stories and made every parent on our street believe he was the safest man alive, and his eyes scanned the houses one by one. He was looking for someone to come out and tell the officers there had been a mistake, looking for a neighbor to vouch for him the way they always had. His gaze passed right over my truck on the next street without seeing me. No one came. Not a single door opened. Not one porch light came on. They put him in the back of one of the cars and drove away. That afternoon, Travis called. The material on Glenn's devices was extensive, organized by date and location, sorted into folders going back over a decade. Multiple children, multiple neighborhoods. Some files had names attached, some had addresses. Glenn had been doing this for a very long time, longer than anyone on our street knew. Then Travis said the part that broke me. Lily's face was in there. My little sister, the girl who said he watched her like he was counting. She was in those files. That evening, Marley called. She was sobbing so hard I could barely make out what she was saying at first. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I sat there and listened to my mom cry. I just asked if Lily was okay. Marley took a shaky breath and said Lily had asked if Glenn was coming back. I said no, he's never coming back. Lily took the phone. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. I could hear her breathing. Then she asked if she could ride her scooter out front again. I said yeah. The bowl of candy stayed on Glenn's porch for 3 weeks. Nobody touched it. The rain filled it and emptied it and filled it again.